The aesthetics of magic fascinate me, in particular the use of magic circles. I've always wondered how one would read such circles. What are the shapes? What about any symbols inside? What do they mean? And why those shapes in particular? It turns out the answer is complicated. There's a rich history behind what's called sacred geometry, a broader category into which magic circles fall. Circles also called circles of art, or circles of art if you're British, or protective circles. Furthermore, there's come to be a modern conceptualization of geometric circular patterns being a kind of catch-all aesthetic of spells. It's just what magic looks like. Cast a fireball and it comes out of a pretty circle. But how were magic circles conceptualized in human history? What follows is the first part of my investigation into magic circles. In this video, I'll begin by overviewing the place of circles of art in history leading up to their medieval application. I will then compile patterns into how they were constructed through the medieval and early modern periods. In essence, I aim to answer the question, what are the parts of a magic circle? In a future video or videos, I hope to examine magic circles in modern media to see where they overlap and where they expand upon older traditions. With all that said, let's dive into the history of magic circles. As alluded to earlier, magic circles aren't a medieval innovation. William Keisel points to similarities between magic circles and yantras in the Hindu practice, which stretched back some 12,000 years in one form or another. The triangular Baghor stone, dating to roughly 9000 BCE, shows clear signs of human sculpture and preserves traces of yellow pigment used to decorate what is believed to be part of an early shrine associated with a mother goddess. That said, yantras mainly stem from tantric worship conditions, which began in the middle of the 1st century CE. They incorporated geometric diagrams and mantras, Sanskrit representations of divinities or divine powers, as an aid in meditation and worship in Indian religions. Mandalas, similar to yantras, are geometric configurations used as a tool of focus in spiritual traditions. The Sanskrit mandal literally means circle. Yantras are usually smaller, less colorful, and they may include a mantra. Some say they are less representations of deities and more lived experiences, facilitating experience with the deity. Each yantra is unique, an abode of the deity, calling the deity to the practitioner's presence through geometric patterns. Madhu Khanna described yantras as a reality lived through the yantra's tie between the outer world, the macrocosm, and the inner world, the microcosm. You'll see these terms a lot, by the way, macrocosm and microcosm. They are all over scholarship and writings about modern practice. Anytime you come across these words, think about a concept of connection, zooming out and zooming in, or the cosmic and the singular, the grand and the minute detail. Ritual use of mandalas and yantras extend to today, but they don't quite fit into the same category of the protective magic circle of medieval Europe. That said, there is a story with just such a protective element in the Hindu epic Ramayana, dating to the 4th or 5th centuries BCE. In one scene, the loyal Lakshmana draws a circle on the ground to protect the protagonist Sita from a demon. Sita, however, is persuaded to cross the circle and she is taken by the demon Ravana. If we fast forward to ancient Mesopotamia, not something I get to say that often, we perhaps find a clearer ancestor of magic circles in the 3,000-year-old practice of Zisuru, an apotropaic, that is, evil warding, ritual in which circles were drawn on the ground with flour or grain as a protective boundary against evil forces. Different grains had different purposes. One kind of flour repelled ghosts, another was used for demons or curses or to facilitate divine interaction. A ritual in the roughly 3,000-year-old anti-witchcraft Maklu tablets instructs the reader to encircle the bed of an afflicted person with flour paste and recite incantations to protect against diseases. Later in Mesopotamian history, we find an early Assyrian rite in which the magician makes an asurtu, or ring, of sprinkled lime around the images of deities he will invoke. The Shorpu incantation series, dating to somewhere between 1350 and 1050 BCE, instructs a circle to be drawn on the ground with a mixture of water and flour, sacred substances, with water related to Ea, god of wisdom, subterranean water, and magic, and flour or other kinds of meal related to Nisaba, the goddess of writing and grain. Finally, the circle was consecrated with an incantation, and note that in this incantation, the translator said the word barrier could be translated as magic circle. Ban, ban, O barrier that none can pass, barrier of the gods that none may break, barrier of heaven and earth that none can change, which no god may annul, nor god nor man can loose, a snare without escape, set for evil, a net whence none can issue forth, spread for or against evil, whether it be evil evil spirit or evil demon or evil ghost or evil devil or evil god or evil fiend or hag demon or ghoul or robber sprite or phantom or night wraith or handmaid of the phantom or evil plague or fever sickness or unclean disease which hath attacked the shining waters of Ea, may the snare of Ea catch it, or which hath assailed the meal of Nisaba, may the net of Nisaba entrap it. So cool. Egyptians commonly intertwined the concepts of encircling and enchanting. During the Greco-Roman period in Egypt, roughly 4th century BCE to 4th century CE, the act of creating or walking in circles pervaded ceremonies, from funerary and temple rituals to private ones. The hieroglyphic determinative, or ideogram, for to go around, the walking legs, was sometimes replaced by scribes with one for to enchant. Egyptologist Robert Rittner suggested the verb phr, to encircle, contain, or control, no idea if I'm supposed to pronounce that differently, could be a root of, or at least be intimately connected with the verb to enchant or protect. Names of rulers were sometimes encircled in an oval cartouche, which might be tied to a concept of magical protection, and would thus indicate a connection between circles and magical protection as far back as the 3rd millennium BCE. One of the coolest ancient rituals I've come across has to be the classical katabasis of Menopus, though to what degree this represents actual practice is suspect. The 2nd century CE satirist Lucian of Samosata wrote this as a report of one Menopus, 5 centuries after the historical Menopus existed, and what happened when Menopus sought the aid of a magi in Babylon. As a satire of the Odyssey, this text more reflects 2nd century stereotypes of the art of the magi than any real Zoroastrian practice, but it still exemplifies how people in classical antiquity conceptualized necromancy. It's a bit of a lengthy passage, but I love it. I had been told that by incantations and other rites, the Magi could open the gates of Hades, take down anyone they chose in safety, and bring him up again. I thought the best thing would be to secure the services of one of these, and learn what is the best life and the right choice for a man of sense. I got up with all speed and started straight for Babylon. When I arrived, I found a wise and wonderful Chaldean. He was white-haired, with a long imposing beard, and called Mithrabarzanes. My prayers and supplications at last induced him to name a price for conducting me down to Hades. Taking me under his charge, he commenced with a new moon and brought me down for 29 successive mornings to the Euphrates, where he bathed me, apostrophizing the rising sun in a long formula of which I never caught much. He gabbled indistinctly, like bad heralds at the games, but he appeared to be invoking spirits. This charm completed, he spat thrice upon my face, and I went home, not letting my eyes meet those of anyone we passed. He took me at midnight to the Tigris, purified and rubbed me over, sanctified me with torches and squills, and other things, muttering the charm aforesaid, then made a magic circle round me to protect me from ghosts, and finally led me home backwards just as I was. It was now time to arrange our voyage. He himself put on a magic robe, median in character, and fetched and gave me the cap, lion skin, and lyre, which you see, telling me if I were asked my name not to say Menopus, but Heracles, Odysseus, or Orpheus, because Orpheus's journey through the underworld went so well for him. So what we have here are various components of what they thought of as necromancy in classical antiquity. You have ritual cleansing, incantations, material components, and a magic circle was one ingredient in a more extensive ritual. The Greek magical papyri contains materials dating from the 100s BCE to the 400s CE. It inherited traditions from Mesopotamia and ancient Egypt, and it tends to treat gods like inferior daemons, that is, spiritual beings from minor deities to natural forces, rather than beings of worship, with protective rites instructing the magician to turn in circular motions, such as facing east first, then rotating counterclockwise through the right. Magicians were to stand within a chalk-drawn circle with inscribed astrological features. One experiment reads, for direct vision, set up a tripod and a table of olive wood or of laurel wood, and on the table carve in a circle these characters. Cover the tripod with clean linen and place a censer on the tripod. In the center of the shrine, surrounding the tripod, inscribe on the floor with a white stylus. It is necessary to keep yourself pure for 3 days in advance. If you wish to see, look inside, wearing clean white garments and crowned with a crown of laurel. We find magic circles in Pliny the Elder's 1st century CE the Natural History, Book 21, for example, reads, "Persons who intend taking up the iris drench the ground about it for some 3 months before with hydromel, that is, mead, as though a sort of atonement offered to appease the earth. With the point of a sword, too, they trace 3 circles round it, and the moment they gather it, they lift it up towards the heavens." Later, in books 29 and 55, he describes plants themselves being used to draw protective circles. Heliotrope as an effective talisman against scorpions, which can be used to draw a circle to entrap the scorpion, or betony, which can be used to torment or even kill snakes just by drawing a circle on the ground using betony around the snake. While Jewish esotericism has existed for over 2,000 years, the 2nd century BCE Jewish sage Ben Sira warned, quote, "You shall have no business with secret things," in opposition to its rise. There isn't much trace of the protective circle in early Jewish magical texts. Later Kabbalistic traditions would draw from apocalyptic literature from the 1st and 2nd centuries BCE, but many of the fundamental esoteric texts wouldn't be written until later years analogous with the High and Late Middle Ages. The foundational text of Kabbalah, the Zohar, wasn't written until the late 13th century, for example. That said, there was an interesting magician who lived in the 1st century BCE, Honi Hameagel, probably I'm saying that wrong, literally named Honi the Circle Maker, famously used a circle not to summon or banish any spirit, but rather to negotiate, it seems, with God. During a drought, Honi drew a circle in the dust and stood in it as a form of protest. He told God he wouldn't move until it rained. It drizzled, but Honi said that wasn't good enough. He expected more rain. Then it began to pour, too much. Honi said he wanted calm rain, and finally he and God found a Goldilocks-level compromise that satisfied them both. This, however, seems to be an isolated incident. The intersections of magic circles in the medieval Latin tradition and Jewish mysticism would grow out of a renewed interest in antiquity with a sort of mini-renaissance in the 12th-ish century, leading to the interacting of diverse worlds and languages and legends and practices, and then flourishing in the famous Renaissance. It was then that Jewish Kabbalah texts were studied, translated, and adapted by Christians and Hermetic magicians, resulting in blended traditions like the Christian Kabbalah and the Hermetic Kabbalah. Note the spelling differences often used to distinguish the traditions. The complex inscription-filled array of circles and squares and a number of patterns we associate with Solomonic practice flourished in the late Middle Ages, roughly 1300 to 1500, and the early modern period, roughly 1500 to 1800, with later revivals and reimagining stretching all the way to today. In fact, studying this kind of Hermetic magic can be difficult, as it often gets easy to get older and modern belief practices entangled. This kind of magic circle we often envision and see portrayed in media today stems from those we find depicted in grimoires. These manuals of occult practice often lend credibility through false attribution to big-name authors, Solomon, Moses, Hermes Trismegistus, who was a legendary figure from the Hellenistic period, and various saints and popes were all used. Magicians, clerics, and philosophers from the 13th to the 20th centuries owned and created such grimoires with depictions of magic circles and instructions on how to perform rituals which employed them, including all the necessary tools, conjurations, invocations, and whatever spirits, angels, demons, seals, or sigils might be relevant to the ritual. These were all employed as part of the practice known as necromancy. Not raising the dead necromancy, but rather the broader medieval concept of pretty much any kind of expressly demonic magic. That is, any magic not natural magic. Natural magic operates through occult forces in nature, occult meaning hidden or non-obvious. So, for example, a plant's curative properties or a magnet's pull might not be obviously apparent when you look at the object, but the power is evident in the object's application. So, that is natural magic. Demonic magic, on the other hand, operates through, well, demonic forces, or that is, forces which Western Europeans would refer to as demonic. The magic circle was one way to create an environment in which a magician may summon, command, or be protected from any supernatural being, whether it is a demon, angel, god, jinn, or even sometimes, yes, the dead. The medieval practice stemmed in part from their classical inheritance. The aforementioned first century practices detailed by Pliny the Elder were reaffirmed in the 13th century by Roger Bacon and again in the 15th century by Henry Cornelius Agrippa. Western traditions also drew influence from the Hebrew language and Jewish mysticism, the aforementioned school of thought called Kabbalah. We see this influence, for example, in the Shemhamphorish probably, from the 6th and 7th books of Moses. These contain corrupted terms associated with the Hebrew 72-lettered name, Shem Ha Mepharash, an influence common in grimoire literature. Gematria, the numerical values of Hebrew letters, was an important consideration to the Kabbalistic magician. The divine names values total 72. In this seal, 36 names with a central yod are shown in the obverse. Multiply the central letter by the number of names to get 360. In the reverse, multiply the number of letters shown in the center of the circle by the number of names, and you also get 360. The idea here is that you are surrounded by God. Now, when it comes to constructing a medieval magic circle, there's no right or wrong way to create the circle, not one that magicians agree on anyway. Instructions vary from time to time, from place to place, from text to text, and the ritual may include anything from a simple chalk circle to a full goetic circle of art complete with names, sigils, words of power, and other details, whether temporary or permanently set on some temple floor. What follows then are guidelines, walking you through the kinds of medieval and early modern practices involved in the creation of magic circles. No one grimoire includes instructions for each of these steps in every instance, but they're the kinds of instruction one would find in their investigation into the grimoire tradition. So this is my compilation of how to build a magic circle and the significance of its parts. Step 1, purification and preparation. Because instruction and implementation will vary, your first step in building a magic circle begins well before the construction process. You'll need to do some preparation. Take time to define what it is you want. Look into the grimoires and the uses they list in ritual practice and study what exactly the instructions will require. Ceremonies, tools, materials, anything you might need to acquire or perform beforehand. Some manuscripts recommend a period of purity as part of the magician's preparation. The Hagramentea, for example, includes ritualized baths, prayers, sexual abstinence, and fasting. The Clavicola Salomonis, more commonly known by its English name, the Key of Solomon, also known as the Greater Key of Solomon, distinguishing it from the Lesser Key of Solomon, also known as the Lemegeton, made 2 or 3 centuries later. And yes, all these names are used all over the place, and yes, it can get very confusing keeping them all straight. Requires abstinence for between a week and 9 days preceding the ritual. Some requirements stretch as far as 40 days. Other impurities are also prohibited, such as the taboo specified when the Key of Solomon recommends a secret room into which no one else is able to enter, in particular girls and women who can defile its cleanliness through their menses, that is, menstrual blood, which is a natural weakness. Casual misogyny. You should give your utmost attention not to allow any unclean chamber pot to enter into the room, for this place should be immaculately clean in every way and should not be influenced by any unsanitary thing. Step 2. Plan the time, place, and direction. Select where you will draw the circle, when you should draw it, and for how long the circle must remain constructed. Is this a temporary single-use circle? Will this be more of an amulet to be worn and maybe used in future ceremonies? Are you creating a permanent engraving, scratching the circle into the floor or on a canvas, or sprinkling material on the ground? Will this need to be established for days, months, years, and if so, what would happen if someone finds it? Say, for example, you use the Heptameron, a grimoire attributed to the 13th century Peter de Abano, though I keep finding authorship dated to sometime between the 15th and 17th centuries. Its title suggests Greek roots, literally translating to the 7 days, which makes sense as the grimoire deals with invocations of angels and spirits based on their associations with days of the week. Note its emphasis on time in the first pages about circles. The form of circles is not always one and the same, but useth to change, according to the order of the spirits that are to be called, their places, times, days, and hours. For in making a circle, it ought to be considered in what time of the year, what day, and what hour that you make the circle, what spirits you would call, to what star and region they do belong, and what functions they may have. It then lists very specific details about how to build circles according to various days or seasons, such as this, the circle for the first hour of the Lord's Day in the springtime. The emphasis on time continues throughout much of the grimoire tradition. As you can tell, you will need to plan the creation of the circle well in advance, giving yourself time to research the appropriate names, planetary positions, and cardinal directions. Yet another feature you'll note has significance in grimoires, as it often does in religious or magical practice. Cathedrals take a cross shape with the altar in the east, Muslims pray toward Mecca, the Greek magical papyri instructs practitioners practitioners to face certain directions while making certain incantations, and grimoires preserve this same importance given to directional orientation. The extensive ceremony then will require an ideal location. Choose a lonely place. You want to avoid the scrutiny of profane civilians or interruptions that can disrupt focus at crucial moments. Seaside locations, caves, ruins, locked and private rooms, wherever it is, find a place that minimizes the odds of disruption. Step 3. Materials. Once you have decided on the time and place, now you select your tool. Many grimoires instruct the magician to draw the circle with a sword or knife. A black-handled knife, as Stephen Skinner refers to it due to numerous such descriptions in manuscripts, is especially common in Greek and Jewish traditions. For example, the Hygromanteia has this interesting instruction for scrying. Take a virgin boy, the scryer, and let it sit on a 3-legged stool. Tidy up your house and let it be ready and clean. Trace the circle under, possibly around the stool. Take a knife with a black handle attached by 3 rivets and thrust it into the circle. Scratch the boy's right fingernail and anoint it with fine oil. Eesh, I don't like that for some reason. Then recite the following words near the boy's ear. Then ask the boy and he will tell you what he sees. Pure science. You may also create a physical circle out of materials like salt, chalk, and a cereal like flour. You might be instructed to place these materials on the ground, or to scratch the circle into the ground, or to inscribe the circle on parchment or cloth. Ritual instructions ascribed to Michael Scott in the 12th and 13th centuries indicated proper astrological times and materials, such as using blood from the bleeding heart of a white dove to create the circle. The Munich Handbook requires one inscription to be made with blood on linen, which was then to be buried near the house of the victim. Another required that inscriptions be made, quote, in the Hebrew manner, presumably from right to left, with the blood of a bat. Jean Charlier de Gerson, if I'm saying that right, spoke of virgin parchment and lion skin to be employed for invoking demons. Finally, the magician should prepare whatever materials will be employed throughout the ritual. These may include a number of objects to be placed at certain times or locations within the magic circle, or they may be objects to be used before or throughout the ceremony. This 14th century manuscript, for example, shows a magician armed with a sword and a crusader-style breastplate, possibly a lamen, Latin for plate, referring to a protective magical pendant or breastplate to be used in some rituals. Note the double-banded circle protecting the magician along with the material components as a treasure-bearing spirit delivers the desired goods. Censers may also be employed to burn incense in the ritual. This Byzantine circle of art found in the Hygromanteia even includes smoke from the censers in its drawing, as well as the ritual blade to be placed at the entrance, allowing the magician to take his place in the circle's center while warding off demons. They're afraid of sharp objects, apparently. The use of censers also continues through later traditions. This circle, a modification of one we saw earlier, comes from the Herpentilus, and it includes a lamen, the breastplate, and a glove. Make sure you know whatever material components you might need beforehand and assemble them all before you begin the ceremony. Step 4. Geometry. The magic circle defines the ritual space in which the ceremony is being carried out, and its geometry is meant to symbolize various aspects of that ritual, which spans 2 planes of existence, the physical and the spiritual realms, hence the term sacred geometry, evoking the notion of a ritual setting meant to intertwine materially and symbolically the 2 realms. So each geometric shape has meaning and intent behind it, meaning that, again, fluctuates based on the time period or author, but general patterns do pervade the geometry. What follows then should not be taken as gospel, but rather as tendencies, symbolism behind sacred geometry that may or may not be what any given practitioner or author has in mind while writing or experimenting with rituals. The circle of art is the central defining aspect of the ceremony, often marking its borders and carrying the most symbolism, even if this symbolism can be paradoxical at times. The circle is the totality of existence, the divine and the infinite, but simultaneously the material and the limited, the defined boundary. It directs attention inward, implying centrality, but it also radiates outward, implying expansion. The circle bears qualities related to navigation and orientation, rather like a compass. One name for the circle of art is the compass round, demonstrating the importance of orientation and position. Astrology and astronomy divided the circle into angles and attributed their degrees to seasons or stellar quadrants. Joined with other geometric figures like triangles and squares, it can communicate time, direction, and successions. The 12 zodiac signs divided the circle into 30-degree arcs. For astronomers, each degree is divided into 60 minutes, each minute into 60 seconds. Astrologers and astronomers divided, measured, and recorded time and celestial bodies to calculate past or future astral supernatural events. For all the arts that employed the circle, from geometry to astrology, it was a tool, a guide, a map, or a symbol. It was used likewise in magical ritual. The Heptameron attributed to Peter de Abano opens with the composition of a circle, quote, because the greatest power is attributed to the circles, for they are certain fortresses to defend the operators safe from the evil spirits. Agrippa believed all geometric patterns themselves held power. In his 1531 Three Books of Occult Philosophy, he wrote, quote, geometrical figures, also arising from numbers, are conceived to be of no less power. Of these, first of all, a circle doth answer to unity, and the number 10, for the unity is the center and circumference of all things, and the number 10, being heaped together, returns unto a unity from whence it had its beginning, being the end and complement of all numbers. A circle is called an infinite line in which there is no terminus a quo nor terminus ad quem, no beginning nor end, whose beginning and end is in every point, whence also a circular motion is called infinite, not according to time, but according to place. Hence a circular being the largest and perfectest of all is judged to be most fit for bindings and conjurations, whence they who adjure evil spirits are wont to environ themselves about with a circle. As one final note, sometimes in place of a circle, an Ouroboros is used. This is the ancient symbol of a serpent devouring its own tail, representing the eternal cycle of destruction and rebirth, the cycles of the seasons, concepts that are infinite, intertwined, and united. It was a symbol prevalent in Egyptian, Greek, and Western magical traditions. Return to the concept of a circle as a compass or a navigator's tool. The triangle, then, is a fixed point in space, a heading directing the navigator somewhere in particular. The magician may place certain names in certain directions or direct himself along compass angles while reciting invocations. Some European grimoires recommend floor circle designs with a separate spirit triangle which could be moved and placed at the correct direction, which would vary from spirit to spirit. This is the case with a 1572 English manuscript containing instructions for a triangle of art alongside a phylactery and a pentacle. One interesting triangle found in the Lemegeton might actually be a refuge for the magician, not the location for the spirit, as it is equipped with implements that a magician might use to command spirits: a sword, a ring, consecrated oil, a scepter, and a protective breastplate. The 1583 Turja shows the martial spirits for each of the cardinal directions. Note the bracketed text listing the spirits by the four directions: ad orientem to the east, ad occidentum to the west, ad septentrionum to the north, and ad meridian, which should say ad meridiem, to the south. With the rise of interest in the compass in the 16th century, grimoires began creating spirit compass roses and long lists attributing precise directions to spirits. Different editions of the Turja Goetia contain clear examples of this navigational orientation-inspired spirit compass. William Keisel rendered this triangle of art from the Lemegeton. The manuscript text above the triangle reads, "The triangle that Solomon commanded the disobedient spirits into. It is to be made 2 foot off from the circle and 3 foot over." This is hard to read. The text below the triangle reads, "Note this triangle is to be placed upon that cost, or possibly coast, the spirit belongeth," and other stuff. While circles are eternity, squares delineate divisions, or quadrants, giving us the cardinal directions, north, east, south, west. When accounting for astrological influence, a magician might face one direction or another depending on which quadrant falls under the desired spirit's jurisdiction. A cross was sometimes used to maintain the quartering effect and placing the magician at the center of the circle, symbolically at the center of the universe. The square or cross, then, is the manifestation of the world. The quarters of this world are often marked with protective or authoritative elements, such as this quartered circle in the Sefer Maftea Shalomo. The central Hebrew text reads in combination Alpha and Omega. A square can also set out a plane of existence, working in tandem with other sacred geometry to establish location, boundaries, direction, and connection with the supernatural. Take, for example, this protective circle from the Hygromanteia, which a magician is to set up for a water scryer with instructions to, quote, "trace the circle with a black-handled knife, sense it, clean it, and pray." The outer entranceway is to the west, leading to a double circle sealed by the words Tetragrammaton, Omega, Adonai. The double square faces east and is protected by the words, by these words. The boundary of the square is protected by even more words. Inside this complex layer of shapes and inscriptions is a pentagram in which the scryer is meant to stand, surrounded by multiple tiers of protection. It is worth noting that all sacred geometry may serve somewhat interchangeable roles, from defining the ritual space to protective gate-like functions. Plenty of the ceremonies depict circles within squares. The Mather's edition of the Key of Solomon has a double circle within a double square surrounded by 8 censers. The Sefer Mefteah Shlomo contains a protective circle drawn within a square and triangle to be employed in the springtime, as indicated by the Talvi on the left side of the square. The entrance path is then sealed off with a divine name so it doesn't compromise the integrity of the protective boundaries. As for everything that begins with the letter P, this one's a bit complicated. To be clear, any of the shapes ending in gram here refer to an encircled polygon, or one in which its circular points are connected. So a pentagon is a 5-sided polygon. A pentagram has 5 points connected, often but not always, within a circle. These should not be confused with pentacles, which are talismanic objects that may be inscribed with a pentagram or another non-pentagram magic figure. So a talisman with a hexagram may be referred to as a pentacle. The Shield of Solomon in the Heptameron, for example, was a principal pentacle used in ceremony work, and it's a hexagram. Most commonly, though, pentacles were talismanic designs made within a double circle, as with these pentacles in a 13th century manuscript, among the earliest in the Latin world. They come with the instructions, and if you do not believe this text, write these characters on an amulet and immediately tie/bind it upon the breast. That's really cool. All this said, when I said that these should not be confused, I of course meant go ahead and confuse them, because some people use the words pentacle and pentagram interchangeably. Clarity and consistency are unfortunately not features of the history of magic. The pentagram was and still is a significant symbol of occult power, as indicated by the number of spirits compelled by its use in the Goetic corpus. The 72 spirits shut up in Solomon's brazen vessel correspond to the 72-degree angle of the pentagram, after all. Pentacles should be inscribed as part of a magic circle or made in their own astrological ceremonies and employed in the ritual to command spirits into obedience. Some instructions even recommend averting your eyes or covering the pentacles with clothes to avoid frightful visions. These, combined with a confident voice and strict commands, could win the spirit over, and revealing a pentacle could augment your authority and thus your confidence. There are other shapes attested beyond pentagons, such as the hexagonal points, which, as mentioned earlier, might appear in pentacles, but beyond that, they are rarer and their meaning is mostly explored by modern practitioners, more interested in present symbolism than in beliefs of past times. John Michael Greer has an interesting exploration of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn that gets into 19th and 20th centuries, and while I find a lot of Greer's assertions about what's dismissible and what's legitimate to be kind of arbitrary, to Greer's credit, he is very transparent that his work blends history with modern practice. His descriptions of geometry provide a great lens into more modern conceptualizations about symbolism, such as the starting point and direction taken when drawing shapes and elemental associations with sacred geometry. However, I'll set aside the more complex shapes as my interests lie less in modern practice. Step 5. Adornments. Now that you have geometric patterns established, it's time to decorate them. Within the defined ritual space, the magician employs names, letters, and symbols to lend the ritual authority, which often stems, ultimately, from God. Bands were the most common places for such inscriptions, which could include names for God, angelic or demonic names, or sigils, icons like the cross, or even snippets from Christian or Quranic liturgy. Many believe the magic, though called demonic, worked with the assistance of gods and angels, the words of power assuring the magician of supernatural support. Let's further break down what the magician might inscribe. Kabbalistic texts such as the Sefer Yetzirah suggest the universe was created with the letters of the alphabet, and the same letters could be used to bring about changes in nature. The famous opening lines capture this mystical sense. By 32 mysterious paths of wisdom, Yah has engraved all things, who is the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, the living God, the Almighty God. He that is uplifted and exalted, he that dwells forever, and whose name is holy, having created his world by 3 derivatives of the Hebrew root word SFR, namely Sefer, a book, Sephor, account, and Sippur, a story, along with 10 calibrations of empty space and 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet, of which 3 are principal letters, 7 are double-sounding consonants, and 12 are ordinary letters. It was held that the Hebrew language was divine, predating the creation, with meanings so profound that they could never be exhausted. When transliterated into other languages, spelling varied in an attempt to preserve the scribe's understanding of some sort of original pronunciation, the idea being that power was in the original language, and to mispronounce the name would diminish the magician's ability to please and attract the owners of the divine name. The concept of power tied to original language has a long history. In the 3rd century CE, Iamblichus said the following regarding nomina magica in Egyptian magic: "But why of meaningful names do we prefer the barbarian, foreign names, to our own? For this, again, there is a mystical reason, for since the gods have shown that the entire dialect of the sacred peoples, such as the Assyrians and the Egyptians, is appropriate for religious ceremonies, for this reason we must understand that our communication with the gods should be in an appropriate tongue. Also, such a mode of speech is the first and the most ancient. But, most importantly, since those who learned the very first names of the gods merged them with their own familiar tongue and delivered them to us, as being proper and adapted to these religious things, forever we must preserve here the unshakable law of tradition. It is therefore evident from this that the language of sacred peoples is preferred to that of other men, and with good reason, for the names do not exactly preserve the same meaning when they are translated. Rather, there are certain idioms in every nation that are impossible to express in the language of another. Moreover, even if one were to translate them, this would not preserve their same power." Agrippa's 1533 3 books of occult philosophy was heavily influenced by these ideas, presenting Kabbalah as a magical art dealing with numerology and divine names and fusing it with Western Christian and astrological concepts. This fusion of Hebrew and Christianity is especially apparent in the 20th century edition of the Goetia, transcribed by Mathers and later published by the famed Aleister Crowley. Note the complex combination of sacred geometry, cardinal directions, and inscriptions, including the Ouroboros-like serpent motif encapsulating the Hebrew names. Incorporated here are all the angel, archangel, and god names of the 10 Sephiroth of Kabbalah. A similar but slightly distinct philosophy in Western Kabbalistic tradition was the idea that divine names did not only lend the magician authority over other subjects, but over the named being itself, too. To know and use the names of angels, demons, spirits, and elementals granted the magician a degree of power over the beings. Angelologies and demonologies provided the names of spirits who presided over specific times, allowing the magician to wield the spirit as an extra ward to protect the operator throughout the ceremony. Such aid, in conjunction with divine names, crosses, and other signs, supported the summoning of especially powerful beings. Combined with the divine names, one may need to recite an invocation. The 13th century sworn book of Honorius depicts the, quote, "circle for the invocation of Saquil on a Thursday in the 8th month in the fall." With an accompanying verse, one must recite, "Be willing to come through the virtue of the power of God, come in truth, admit the glory and honor and victory of God," and all the rest of this. Note the combination of factors we've examined to this point. The circle represents the celestial, the square the terrestrial, the quadrants a directional divide, with astrological views influencing the names and the times as planetary spirits encircle the earth, rather like stars above the firmament. Weave into this the idea of macrocosm and microcosm, and you can see how magicians could conceptualize this encircled ritual space as a smaller version of the universe, with the practitioner standing at its center. Not all inscriptions were divine names. Joining these names are a wide variety of words, which include invented names, words of unknown origin, names and words imported from foreign languages with varying degrees of fidelity to the original language, and pure nonsense. People refer to some or all of these with different titles, words of power, or even barbarous words of power, sometimes condensed as barbarous names, with verba incognita, unknown words, as a way to refer to the more mysterious words under the broader category of nomina magica, that is, magical names or names of power. Some of these names are references to God from ancient languages. El and Adonai come from the Hebrew words for God and Lord, Hagios from the Greek for holy, tetragrammaton being the Greek word referring to the 4-letter Hebrew name for God, Yod-He, Vav-He. The use of such words and names has a long history. In the aforementioned account of Menipus by Lucian, the invocations of the Chaldean Magus were difficult to understand, as he gabbled indistinctly, but he appeared to be invoking spirits. The white-bearded magician uttered these while drawing a circle around Menopus. The 15th century Munich handbook has an interesting multi-purpose magic circle. Its form is basic, a circular band with a triangle band inside, but the objects and characters are complex. A sword, ring, vessel for oil, scepter, and square tablet with a tetragrammaton and 4 crosses on it are all arranged within the triangle. Magical characters, crosses, and words are also inscribed, including a common magical word, AGLA, standing for Ata Gibor Leolam Adonai, Hebrew for You are mighty forever, O Lord. A further inscription outside the triangle reads, Figure of Friendship, which was to be made at the hour of Venus. Another inscription says it is a, quote, figure for the making of bridges and discovery of treasures, again hinting at the multi-purpose nature of this circle. Funnily enough, grimoire authors warned magicians not to deviate from the forms of nomina magica, even though they often clearly resemble confused forms of foreign names or words. Some point back to the divinity of language as an explanation for this. The closer the name was to a being's original form or to an ancient language, the more it was connected to the source of power. Others have suggested the words of power didn't always have a meaning, or not one the magician needed to know. The study of the words and their utterance could be enough to create an atmosphere of otherness, something like a trance, opening the magician to a subtler perception of supernatural encounters. And it might be that some nomina magica were pure nonsense words. For example, Greek and Hebrew ingredients occasionally contributed to palindromes that made no sense when pronounced, but that had some kind of visual effect. The Greek magical papyri claims Ablanathanalba is Hebrew, but the term has no real meaning. That said, it's also possible that any nomina magica that appears to be nonsense has, in fact, some kind of lost etymology or origin. A 1974 publication from Yale on a papyrus containing some Coptic psalms reported what were believed to be 3 nonsense words, thulal, mulal, and bulal. Only later did researchers realize that when transliterated correctly, the barbarous words of power were actually the Coptic versions of the traditional names of the 3 magi who visited Jesus. Additional inscriptions could amplify the authority of names. These could include whole sentences or adjurations to be written within the bands or at designated locations inside of a circle. Richard Kiekefer describes one circle, and I wish I could have found an image of it, that has 5 concentric bands encircling a complex of crosses, stars, and other signs and formulas like the Salve Crux Digna or Hail, O Noble Cross. Circles in the 16th century grimoire of Honorius show 3 of the 7 spirits to be conjured during the successive days of the week. Monday reads, Cross, I forbid thee, Lucifer, in the name of the most holy Trinity to enter within this circle, while Tuesday and Wednesday contain commands like Fremasta Bami and Come Astaroth. The Ars Notoria has names of unknown origin, like these. I'm so done trying to pronounce things. Note the strange symbols and drawings in the circle center. Sometimes you will need to inscribe symbols that aren't words or names, but sigils, a type of seal or symbolic representation of the spirit, angel, demon, or desired outcome. One of the most well-known lists is that of the 72 princes of hell as found in the Lesser Key of Solomon. Francis Barrett's 1801 Magus shows 7 planetary powers with the days of the week, archangels and their sigils, and astrological signs. Similar tables of spirits are found in grimoires, some with the zodiac signs, some with decans, and some with other astrological positions. Such symbols and methodology were passed down through the grimoires and reference materials. Aleister Crowley's 1909 collection titled 777 or 777, I don't know, I've only seen it in writing, is perhaps the most well known. But sigils were also commonly created through kameas, a magical square, and if you thought magic circles were complicated, buckle up. This practice gets super convoluted as different magical squares are made in association with different planets, sometimes on metals, also associated with that planet, with multiple dimension options per planetary square, and this video is about circles, not squares. In short, the names of spirits were converted into numbers, placed on squares, and then connected through lines that form the abstract sigils. Sigils might have been utilized similarly to names, verses, and words of power, which is to say as emblems of authority connecting the magician to the summoned spirit or to the agent on whose authority the magician was acting. Some more modern magicians, however, view sigils as having their own inherent power, and I'm just going to touch on this and move on because it's really interesting to me, but not what I want to focus on. The 20th century occultist Austin Osmar Spare, if I'm saying his name right, dismissed the medieval sigils and created his own. He argued that the supernatural beings being summoned or evoked were unconscious complexes, and as such, they could be created. His act of creating a sigil was the creation of the supernatural being. The artist Brian Geisen built off Spare, combining his methods with Kameya's to produce a name or concept to a glyph. His art has been described as an act of sorcery in which he would write across pages from right to left, rotate the page, and repeat, creating symbols around a point or a grid. The whole field of chaos magic, such a cool name, follows Spare's methodology. One condenses an idea, intention, or statement into a single monogram, a sigil, and then imbues the created glyph with power or charge. The idea being the sigil will embed itself in the magician's subconscious, and then, having been forgotten, it will begin to work unencumbered by desire. But let's set that aside. Back to earlier magic. Besides words and symbols, a number of material components may be employed: incenses, stones, herbs, wax reclamages, images, vessels, blades, and a variety of means to create the ritual space. The Key of Solomon has the magician employ bloodstone, charcoal, consecrated water, and chalk. The Liber Particularis permits the magician to use an astrolabe or a perfect clock in addition to quadrants as locations for summoning spirits. Objects may be placed at certain locations, working in conjunction with or instead of other components, like the sacred geometry. Recall the aforementioned circle, or rather square, in the Hygromanteia. This rather difficult to read arrangement has various markings that are not inscriptions the magician makes, but instructions on where to put various materials. Braziers with lit charcoals are placed on the borders of the circle to be used for burning incense. The magician is to enter from the south, stand where the Greek in the center instructs, place incense on the charcoals, trace the circles, and nomina magica with a black-handled knife, and then place the knife at one entrance, though this could mean the knife should be placed onto or stabbed into the ground. Note too the lock marks that secure the four corners, another layer of protection in case any of the geometry is imperfectly joined. We see a similar circle in the 1572 grimoire, The Works of Solomon the Wise, called his clavicle revealed. Its porta, or gate, is sealed by hexagrams, and the boundaries are reinforced by lock marks, divine names, crosses, and braziers at the cardinal directions for burning incense. The Lemegeton has the exorcist command spirits into the triangle with a hazel staff, with assistance of vocal bonds and chains, in order to cause the unruly spirit to yield in obedience. Both the Lemegeton and Goetia reference a brazen vessel to be used in place of a triangle, the former stating that you may command these spirits into the brazen vessel as you do into the triangle, saying that you do forthwith appear before this circle in this vessel of brass in a fair and comely shape, and as is shown before the conjurations. In the art of the Church of Goetia, the magician commands the spirits to appear outside the circle or in a crystal stone. A 16th century engraving by Jasper Isaac even depicts a skull as the spirit's designated vessel. Skulls commonly take religious significance, as seen in witchcraft, voodoo, Buddhism, and Christianity. Just think about saints' relics. And finally, step 6, position and ritual. With the circle construction complete, the magician typically stands at the center point with the spirits outside the circle. As Michael Scott's 13th century Liber Particularis states, when spirits of the air are to be invoked, their invoker should stand within a circle in a place duly required by his art, and utter the names of the spirits with a firm face and loud voice while holding a book or a naked sword in his hand. Spirits would then arrive at designated locations, often the edge of the circle, sometimes over a ritual object. I mentioned earlier the astrolabe used in the same book, the Liber Particularis, but triangles of art or other objects like a crystal or a bowl of water might be used as well. A circle from the 1800 Grimoire de Pape Honorius has a designated location for the spirit outside the magician's circle. We also see in this 1425 manuscript a depiction of a magician standing inside a protective circle, negotiating with demons and holding what is probably a grimoire. The Key of Solomon requires complex ceremonies, including the memorization of long Latin orations and conjurations conjurations, gathering components before the ceremony begins and observing rules for days building up to the ceremony, then performing recitations while drawing a circle on the ground and making crosses with a sword in the air. Operators and assistants should be purified with water and hyssop, fumigated with incense, and get comfortable for a lengthy conjuration. But conjurations aren't always comfortable. Many rituals require some kind of sacrifice. You might get lucky and only have to scatter milk and honey in the air or place ashes, flour, salt, and other items in jars within the magic circle. A Prague manuscript tells a magician to offer coal, bread, cheese, 3 shoeing nails, barley, and salt as presents for demons. That's nice. But usually the sacrifices are animals. The Munich handbook has the magician sacrifice a white rooster, which the spirit will accept. Many instructions call for a hoopoe, which Albertus Magnus says are valued by spirits for their brain, tongue, and heart. It was widely believed that demons were enticed by blood. An early 13th century manuscript in Paris instructs, take a bat and sacrifice it with your right hand. With your left hand, draw blood from its head. Michael Scott said necromancers mix blood or a wine that resembled blood, quote, and they sacrifice with flesh or a living human being, such as a bit of their own flesh or of a corpse, knowing that the consecration of a spirit in a ring or a bottle cannot be achieved except by the performance of many sacrifices. So, why did you just go through this whole complex ritual? Well, there is a wide variety of uses for ritual magic. The Munich handbook alone has several examples. Experiments could grant the magician the love of a woman, invisibility, or even knowledge of all liberal arts from spiritual instruction. One could sow hatred among enemies, win the favor of dignitaries, practice divination, or even create an illusion of a grand banquet complete with servants and entertainment. Pentacles too have a wide variety of uses. The 16th century Italian author and sculptor Benvenuto Cellini was given pentacles to use as an added measure against spirits in conjuration with noxious incenses like sulfur or or this, a pungent gum resin also called devil's dung. The secret seal of Solomon in the Goetia was described as the means by which Solomon commanded spirits into the brazen vessel and sealed them therein. Grimoires list uses for pentacles that include protection against poisoning, fear, stormy weather, and general safety at all times. Sleeping, eating, drinking, moving, not moving, in business, in battle. Some supposedly make the bearer invincible, give grace and victory over animals, enemies, and lovers. Some can quench fire and halt water in its path. Pretty much anything a demon could do could become a use of a magic circle. Kiekefer grouped these into 3 basic categories. The first is affecting others' minds and wills. This could entail driving one mad, inflaming them with love or hatred, or compelling action or non-action. The 12th century manuscript, and no, I don't know which one because as brilliant as Kiekefer was, citing his sources was not among his strengths, had this conjuration calling on demons to afflict a victim so he can't sleep, eat, drink, or act. And I definitely felt that way sometimes. The second category is creating illusions. There's the aforementioned banquet, but also an image of a boat or of a horse, and of course raising the dead. This might be what we think of as typical necromancy, but many grimoires say such feats are only illusory. Put a consecrated ring on the foot or hand of a corpse, and 6 demons will animate the body so it can appear to rise and speak. The same ring on a living person will make him appear dead until the ring is removed. But these are all merely apparitions. The third and one of the most common categories was secret knowledge, often for treasure hunting or to find thieves or lovers, which the demon might disclose from its background knowledge over an extensive lifespan or from its ability to investigate or by some other infernal means of communication. Keisel documents several examples. A 14th century manuscript illumination of the pilgrimage of the life of man shows a necromancer in a circle and a demon bringing him treasure. The Goetia includes several demons who specifically hold jurisdiction over the acquisition of knowledge. The aforementioned Benvenuto Cellini created a magic circle to divine information concerning a love interest in his life. The Shemhamphorash features a circle on the title page that is, quote, from the arcane Bible of Moses, which will certainly bring to light treasures of earth if buried in the treasure earth. Note the compass rose motif as though it were pointing the way to the hidden treasure. Barrett's 1801 Magus includes ceremonial equipment for scrying with a crystal, 3 magic circles, a wand, candles, and a tripod where incense is to be burned. The Sworn Book of Honorius includes a magic circle drawn in moist ashes scattered around a bed, 100 names of God inscribed around the circle, and a purification ritual with water and incense, and instruction to fall asleep for a vision of the celestial palace and the majesty of God in his glory, and the 9 orders of angels, and the company of all blessed spirits. In another oniric vision, the Munich Handbook instructs the magician to write divine names and the names of the angels Michael, Gabriel, and Raphael on a double-banded circle, to repeat the conjurations 3 times, and to place the circle beneath the right ear of the magician as he goes to sleep. The angels would then appear to him in his dream and provide the desired information. But the most common use of magic circles, of course, is to protect the magician. Or so I thought, and well, to be honest, I still think so. But one of the most widely cited scholars on medieval magic, Richard Kiekefer, whom I've alluded to a couple times already, says there's not much evidence that the borders of the circle served a protective function. There were legends that necromancers interpreted these circles as protective devices within which the magicians were safe from demons, but little evidence from the grimoires shows magicians themselves were thinking that way. I'm not sure about this. He points to one experiment in the Munich Handbook that says that demons will come inside the circle when invoked, and another in which the periphery does have a kind of special significance. It's a wide circumference wherein lovers could rendezvous, a very wide circumference with ample space, apparently. And there are other instances that show magic circles had uses beyond protection. Remember Honi the Circle Maker, he used it for divine negotiations. Skinner's deep investigation into the Greek magical papyri lists a number of objectives for the use of nomina magica, which includes objectives from love spells to what we would think of as more typical necromancy. All this said, I've got to admit, I'm not exactly sure what Kiekefer meant by there is no evidence for this. The Heptameron clearly states, the greatest power is attributed to circles, for they are certain fortresses to defend the operators safe from the evil spirits. So there is at least some evidence magicians viewed circles in this way. I even questioned my notes and I went back to the chapter Necromancy in the Clerical Underworld in his textbook Magic in the Middle Ages, and sure enough, there it is on pages 160 to 161. Kiekefer says, quote, while there is ample evidence in medieval Europe for the importance of circles as foci of magical power, the necromancers evidently conceived them mainly as enclosures within which various signs and objects might be contained, nor is there much evidence that the borders had a protective function. As we will see, legends about the necromancers interpreted these circles as protective devices within which the magicians were safe from demons, but there is little reason to think that necromancers themselves viewed them in this way. And I don't know what to make of this. I disagree, and I think Kiekefer himself disagrees. I don't know. The book was originally published in 1989. Maybe it's just out of date. In 2003, he said that, quote, the circle is clearly seen as a protective enclosure. He points to a 12th century account of a priest who stepped outside his circle and was viciously attacked and killed by the devil, and another in which a necromancer's client rushed from the circle to chase a beautiful woman only to have his neck wrung like a hen. Stephen Skinner's 2014 dissertation says that protective clothing and an inscribed circle were the 2 main ways magicians protected themselves. Keisel's 2015 publication says that protection is the most well-known attribute of the Circle of Art. He points to the rubric of exorcisation in the Key of Solomon, which explains how the operator would secure divine protection from authority over spirits by facing the 4 directions and repeating, O Lord, be thou unto me a tower of strength against the appearance and assaults of evil spirits. That sounds like a protective element to me. The 16th century Clavicle of Solomon, according to Ptolemy the Grecian, which is just an English translation of the Key of Solomon, says, quote, these pentacles and ineffable names should be glorified with great honor, for they be holiness of all hate Middle English, even if it's late Middle English. For they be holiness of all holiness for the defense of the body and the soul. Later it includes this counsel. And when they be in circles ordained, let the mister enjoin such precepts to his scholars that they move not from their places ordained by any occasions. If they should see great marvels, if they should see mountains and towers of fire falling upon them, if they should see their father and mother slain, if they should see the world almost at an end for any adversity that they see, let them not move, for all this that we have said cannot hurt them. Skinner describes a conjuration to the 4 directions in the Hygromanteia that might summon as many as 120 spirits. The manuscript says, quote, after this conjuration you will see them coming like a regiment. Do not lose courage, but tell them to stand outside the circle. But then, shortly afterwards, Skinner does show a 16th century grimoire, supposedly owned by the famous magician John Dee, which depicts the demon king Varkon Rex, and he is standing inside the circle, surrounded by 5 archers and a number of snakes and other creatures that are poised, ready to strike. So examples like this show that, yes, magic circles were not exclusively for protection, but I think it is safe to say that protection was a primary use. Well, this has been a lot. Here's everything I've covered in one slide for your convenience. Please remember that this has been my summary from a couple months of reading and out of amateur interest. It is by no means comprehensive, nor is it a peer-reviewed, published work of scholarship. If you, like me, find ancient beliefs and practices fascinating, I would recommend narrowing the topic further to steer your own study, say to a specific century or author or time period. Go to the primary sources, find a grimoire, and look at how that text or that author represents magic. And please do not rely on me for any kind of advice when it comes to practice. I am not and have no desire to be any kind of practitioner of magic. I just like history and circles, obviously. Show me an intricate pattern and I just want to know more about what it is and how it works or why it was made in that way. I like them. So in the future, I may revisit this topic. I've been looking at circles in modern media, and I may take my own advice and look into a specific time period or text, possibly for a future video or just for the thrill of learning. But in the meantime, here is this video as a sort of artifact, my oversimplified summary, giving future me something to look back on as an overview of my notes thus far. And if you've made it this far, thank you, and I'm glad you share my interest of this peculiar portion of human history. Magician and historian Jake Stratton Kent summarized the use of magic circles in 2010, saying, "A circle is not an obsolete symbol of a superstitious fear of spirits, but an intentionally created ritual space for various purposes. It is not always required for all kinds of ritual work, but neither is it of no value. Quite the contrary. Making sacred space is among the most primal of rituals. Such intentional actions are as worthy of the term psychoactive as any substance. In other words, the creation of the circle is the point of the circle."